why is it important in this context to talk of things like cooperatives? Because I've spent a lot of time having discussions with colleagues in the business, in entrepreneurship, and colleagues in business and thinkers within the business schools who believe that cooperatives are a defunct business model. And yet, in reality, every business you look at serves the same purpose. It serves the interest of its founders. It serves the interest of its stakeholders. And when we look up at the cooperative, all those models we have today of businesses were built from a traditional cooperative. Capitalism is based, it's a derivative of cooperatives. And we tend to also make a huge mistake. The way we are deceived by all these disruptions, we are also confused when we start thinking about cooperatives and cooperation. We think it's communism and therefore it's bad. And you'd hear a lot of bad names attached to cooperatives on that basis that it's communism or it's socialism. It has nothing to do with communism. It has nothing to do with socialism, because throughout sociocultural development, human beings have consistently gone back to cooperate. And even in prehistory, to hunt, to gather, it's all about cooperation. You couldn't hunt effectively, or you couldn't hunt even big games if you are on your own. Cooperation has always the basis upon which human society has evolved and developed. So there's this misnomer that cooperatives and thinking cooperatively means we are communistic. It's misaligned. Today, all the business models we follow derive from the same concept, that you need to look up at the socio-economic welfare of the stakeholders. And in this case, when you look up at other forms of businesses, their survival or they're structured along where you build high walls and exclude others. Yet cooperatives take a different alignment, where if they were defunct, you wouldn't think that you'd expect to find them in some of the most advanced economies in the world. If you take the biggest economy pre-COVID, we'll see what happens after COVID. The biggest economy on earth today is the United States. And the United States, 50% of Americans are members of a cooperative or beneficiaries of a cooperative. The same you would find to countries like Germany. You'll find in half of European Union, 50% of their citizens are members of a cooperative or direct beneficiaries of a cooperative. So this tells you something, that even the most advanced economies which we look to, or which we aspire to reach at some point, use cooperatives as models. So instead of looking up and dwelling on debating whether they are functional or important, there's no doubt cooperatives are a powerful economic model, and they're a powerful way of bringing socioeconomic development. And they've been formalized in some of these advanced economies for centuries now. And they have survived and remain so. It's not by coincidence that you would look at more than half of the world's most advanced, the capitalistic economy. Half of its population are dependent on cooperatives, and they operate their local economic affairs through cooperatives. So that debate of saying, no, cooperatives, do they work or should they, is neither here nor there. But what is the basis then would we seek to cooperate? It should be more than economic. It has to include your social development. It has to include, even for others, things like political benefits. Political benefits is not about being elected into office. Political benefits is about leadership. Political benefit is about ability to organize a community or a society towards a particular goal, be it economic or social. Therefore, you would find that if one goes back and look back, the context is cooperatives have always been a response. They've been applied as a response towards economic stress or social upheaval. Throughout history, they have been used in response. Countries which have created solid economic development have always used the models of cooperatives as a recovery tool and as a recovery system. Because when economic stress sets in a community or a society, it affects everyone else. And if everyone is equally affected, the chances of cooperating and coming together to seek common ground are higher than when everything else is fine and everyone is sitting up in their corners. So economic stress and social upheaval are serious drivers to seek cooperation within any given space and context. Then one would ask the question today, if we look immediately, we say, oh, but we've got economic crisis. We are currently under COVID, and it is decimating economies, not just South African. It's decimating economies, and its effect and consequences has not yet been captured. And we are also going through social upheaval. We're changing the way we live. We're being forced into social distance, which is contrary to what human beings is all about. All these would qualify that probably this is the perspective we must focus on as a basis to argue for more cooperation. But then I would ask another question now. Was there any economic or social stability in pre-COVID era in South Africa? And this, be it rhetorical or direct question, then it forces us to go back. Let's look at it pre-January. Was South Africans, majority of us, in economic and social stability? Were we? If we were, how come even then majority of South Africans have been economic minority? They do not participate in the economy. This is the conundrum I call majority economic minority. Highest number, 85% of South Africans are excluded from the economy of this country. When you have a country of less than 58 million people, and 17 million of those depend on the state for social welfare, that's a crisis. It simply means you had a large population which had already been excluded. So the economic stress and social upheaval within this country not started with COVID. But we use this as, okay, arguably this is unprecedented. But the fact that you actually have the majority of the country not being economically active, you've got the youth, people who are under 35, 53% of them unemployed, and the number is going to grow. You've got a substantial number of the youth, more than 40%, who have never worked since they turned 18. That's a crisis. But at no point did we treat it as a crisis. We talk about it in parliament, we talk about it within social setups. Oh, the country is going through this, the country is going through that. But we have never been urgent, as we are now looking up at COVID, as if COVID in itself has created an unprecedented consequence. In reality, the country has been in serious economic stress and social upheaval prior to this point, although we might use it as an unprecedented event. So then, if we use it as an event, what then should we do beyond it? If history tells us that crisis points are the best positions to start cooperating, how will we do that? And yet, arguably, we definitely have been in social exclusion. We've had continuation. The real crisis this country, or the real crisis this group should be focused on, is what do we do beyond COVID? That's where our crisis begins. Because this condition of COVID has been created externally, imported, but when the solution is found, will that mean things will go to normal? What is normal? If things go back to normal, it means we will continue with exclusion from participation in economic and social democracy, which the current society and country promises. That's where our way of thinking what is a crisis and how should we respond should change. Then the focus must always be, shouldn't we be saying, whilst we are in lockdown and whilst we are thinking of how we're going to reopen the economy, we're not going to reopen the economy. We should be thinking of how are we going to actually increase participation within this economy. That's where the concepts of cooperating, the questions of how do we cooperate comes into play.